The first time she touched my back, it wasn't out of love. It wasn't even out of comfort. It was a silent plea, made in the darkness of a tiny cabin where one wrong move could expose the biggest lie either of us had ever told. I lay perfectly still, pretending to be asleep while my heart hammered so loudly I was certain everyone outside could hear it. Then, with trembling fingers, she slowly traced the length of my spine as though trying to convince herself I was real. In that single moment, the line between pretending and believing disappeared forever, and neither of us would ever be the same again. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness, forgiveness, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that stay with you long after they end. When I first met Emma, neither of us expected to become the center of a carefully crafted lie. She was practical, guarded, and always carried herself like someone who had learned the hard way not to depend on anyone. I was the opposite. I believed people deserved trust until they proved otherwise, even though that belief had left me disappointed more than once. We worked in the same architecture firm, exchanging little more than polite greetings until one unexpected project changed everything. The company needed representatives for a charity retreat hosted by an influential client whose traditional family expected every adult guest to attend with a partner. Declining the invitation meant risking a contract that could secure everyone's jobs for years. My manager jokingly suggested that Emma and I pretend to be a couple for one weekend. Everyone laughed. Somehow, the joke became a plan. The agreement seemed harmless enough. Smile together in public, hold hands when necessary, invent a believable story about how we met, and survive 3 days before returning to our normal lives. We even rehearsed details over coffee, memorizing imaginary anniversaries and favorite restaurants that had never existed. It felt ridiculous, but somewhere beneath the laughter I noticed how lonely both of us really were. Pretending to belong to someone was strangely easier than admitting how empty our personal lives had become. The retreat took place at an old mountain lodge surrounded by towering pine trees and endless silence. It looked like the kind of place where forgotten memories drifted through the fog every morning. Everything went smoothly until the receptionist apologized with genuine embarrassment. Due to an unexpected plumbing failure, almost every room had become unusable. There was only one cabin left, and it contained just a single bed. Neither of us argued. Refusing would only invite suspicion, and our carefully rehearsed relationship would begin falling apart before it had truly begun. We accepted the key with forced smiles while our stomachs tightened with nervous anticipation. Throughout dinner we played our roles perfectly. We laughed at stories, shared desserts, leaned close enough to convince everyone we were deeply in love. The performance exhausted us more than any physical labor ever could. When night finally arrived, the cabin felt impossibly small. Rain tapped gently against the windows while the fireplace crackled with comforting warmth. The bed stood in the center of the room like an unavoidable truth. We folded blankets into an imaginary barrier and joked awkwardly about staying on our own sides. Yet the silence that followed carried the weight of everything we refused to say. Sleep never came easily. Every creak of the wooden walls reminded me that one careless movement could shatter our fragile arrangement. Hours passed before I felt the mattress shift almost imperceptibly. Then came that unforgettable touch. Her fingertips rested lightly against my back before slowly tracing the line of my spine. There was nothing inappropriate about it. It felt less like desire and more like someone searching for reassurance in complete darkness. Her hand trembled as though she feared even that small comfort might disappear. I remained still, not because I wanted to deceive her, but because instinct told me she needed the quiet moment more than explanations. Eventually her breathing steadied. For the first time since we'd arrived, she slept peacefully. The next morning she behaved as though nothing had happened. I respected her silence. Yet something had changed between us. Our conversations became gentler. The distance we'd carefully maintained began shrinking without either of us noticing. We no longer needed to rehearse affectionate gestures. Holding her hand during breakfast felt strangely natural. Looking into her eyes no longer resembled acting. Over the following days I learned pieces of the life she rarely shared. Her father had abandoned the family when she was young, leaving her mother to work endless shifts simply to keep the lights on. Emma grew up believing love always came with an expiration date. Depending on people felt dangerous because eventually everyone left. She had spent years building invisible walls strong enough to survive disappointment, even if those same walls kept happiness outside. In return, I told her about my own failures. Years earlier I had planned to marry someone who walked away only weeks before the wedding. Since then I buried myself in work, convincing everyone that ambition mattered more than companionship. The truth was simpler. I had stopped believing I was enough for anyone to stay. By the end of the retreat, our fake relationship had become surprisingly convincing because it was no longer entirely fake. Still, reality waited beyond the mountains. Back in the city we returned to separate apartments and ordinary routines, pretending nothing significant had happened. Yet ordinary life suddenly felt emptier than before. Weeks passed. We continued meeting for coffee after work, always inventing practical excuses. One project became another. Lunches became evening walks. Without realizing it, we built a friendship stronger than either of us expected. Still, neither of us dared acknowledge the growing feelings between us. Fear remained louder than hope. Everything nearly ended on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Emma accepted a promotion in another city. She believed leaving would simplify everything before emotions became impossible to ignore. I congratulated her with a smile that hid the quiet panic growing inside me. Watching her pack her office felt like watching sunlight slowly disappear behind heavy clouds. The night before her departure, I found myself unable to sleep. Every memory returned with painful clarity, especially that quiet moment in the cabin when her fingertips had traced my spine. I finally understood why it haunted me. It wasn't the touch itself. It was the trust hidden inside it. For just a few seconds, someone who had spent her life expecting abandonment had chosen vulnerability instead. The following morning I drove to the train station through relentless rain. Crowds hurried in every direction while loud announcements echoed across the platforms. I almost turned around several times, convinced I had already missed my chance. But then I saw her standing beside the train with a single suitcase, looking just as uncertain as I felt. For a long moment neither of us moved. We simply looked at each other across the crowded platform, surrounded by strangers who had no idea two lives balanced on a single decision. I realized love rarely arrives with certainty. More often it appears disguised as fear, asking whether someone is brave enough to choose hope despite every reason not to. I walked toward her without rehearsing speeches or perfect words. There was nothing dramatic about what happened next. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the greatest weight. I admitted that pretending had become impossible because somewhere between shared breakfasts, mountain trails, unfinished conversations, and one unforgettable night in a tiny cabin, I had fallen in love with the woman who believed everyone eventually left. She cried before I finished speaking. Not because my words were extraordinary, but because they contradicted every painful lesson life had taught her. She confessed she had accepted the promotion not because she wanted to leave, but because staying frightened her even more. Loving someone meant risking another heartbreak. Running away seemed safer. For the first time, neither of us chose safety. Emma stepped away from the train. The doors closed behind us as it slowly disappeared into the distance, carrying away the future we thought we were supposed to have. Standing there in the rain, soaked to the skin and surrounded by complete strangers, we laughed through tears because neither of us had any idea what came next. Somehow, not knowing felt strangely beautiful. Life afterward wasn't magically perfect. We argued over ordinary things. We struggled with demanding careers and lingering insecurities. Some nights old fears returned, whispering that happiness never lasted. But instead of hiding behind silence, we learned to face those fears together. Every difficult conversation strengthened the trust we once believed impossible. Months later we returned to the same mountain lodge, this time with no lies to protect and no audience to convince. The old receptionist recognized us immediately and smiled knowingly before handing over the keys. Fate, it seemed, possessed an unexpected sense of humor. Once again, there was only one room available. This time there was no invisible blanket dividing the bed. No rehearsed affection. No pretending. As snow drifted gently beyond the windows, we lay quietly beneath warm blankets listening to the peaceful crackle of the fireplace. Emma rested her head against my shoulder before reaching out once more. Her fingers slowly traced the length of my spine exactly as they had on that unforgettable night months earlier. Only this time I turned toward her instead of pretending to sleep. In her eyes I saw the frightened woman who had once believed love always disappeared. I also saw the courageous woman who chose to stay despite that fear. And she saw the men who finally understood that being strong isn't about hiding vulnerability. It's about trusting someone enough to reveal it. Sometimes the smallest moments become the turning points that reshape entire lives. Not grand declarations or perfect plans, but quiet acts of comfort offered in darkness when words are no longer enough. One gentle touch had become the beginning of a love neither of us expected, proving that even relationships born from pretending can grow into something honest enough to last forever. Before we reach the end of this story, leave a comment with the words, "Love begins with trust." We'd love to know how many of you believe that one small act of kindness can completely change